Okay, let's finish our chapter, Dreams. I is usually writing a bit more than this on the labels, the BFG said, but you is watching me and making me jumpsy. Oh, I can go sit somewhere else, Sophie said. Do not go, the BFG said. Look in the jar carefully. I think you will be seeing this dream. Sophie peered into the jar, and there, sure enough, she saw a faint, translucent outline of something about the size of a hen's egg. There was just a touch of colour to it, a pale sea green, soft and shimmering and very beautiful. There it lay, this small, oblong, sea green jelly-ish thing, at the bottom of the jar, sitting quite peacefully, but pulsing gently, the whole of it moving in and out ever so slightly, as though it were breathing. It's moving, Sophie cried. It's alive. Of course it is alive. What will you feed it? Sophie asked. It is not needing food, the BFG told her. Well, that's cruel, Sophie said. Everything alive needs food of some sort, even trees and plants. The north wind is alive, the BFG said. It is moving. It touches you on the cheek and on the hands, but nobody is feeding it. Sophie was silent. This extraordinary giant was disturbing her ideas. He seemed to be leading her towards mysteries that were beyond her understanding. A dream is not needing anything, the BFG went on. If it is a good one, it is waiting peaceably forever until it is released and allowed to do its job. But if it is a bad one, it is always fighting to get out. The BFG stood up and walked over to one of the many shelves and placed the latest jar among the thousands of others. Please, can I see some of the other dreams? Sophie asked him. The BFG hesitated. Nobody has ever seen them before, he said, but perhaps after all I is letting you have a little peep. He picked her up off the table and stood her on the palm of one of his huge hands. He carried her towards the shelves. Over here is some of the good dreams, the fizz wizards. Would you hold me closer so I can read the labels? Sophie said. My labels is only telling bits of it, the BFG said. Dreams is usually much longer, and the label is there just to remind me. Sophie started to read the labels. The first one seemed long enough to her. It went right around the jar, and as she read it, she had to keep turning it. And this is what it said. Today, I is sitting in class, and I discovered that as I is staring very hard at my teacher in a special way, I is able to put her to sleep. So I keep staring at her. In the end, her head drops off onto her desk, and she goes fast to sleep and snorkles loudly. And then in marches the head teacher, and he shouts, Wake up, Miss Plumridge! How dare you go to sleep in class? You go fetch your hat and coat, and you leave the school forever, 'cause you is sacked. But in a jiffy, I is putting the head teacher to sleep as well, and he crumples onto the floor like a lump of jelly, and there he lies in a heap, and he starts snorkeling even louder than Miss Plumridge. And then I is hearing my mummy's voice saying, Wake up, 'cause your breakfast is ready. What a funny dream, Sophie said. It's a well-bringer, the BFG said. It's wopsy. Inside the jar, just below the edge of the label, Sophie could see the putting to sleep dream lying peacefully on the bottom, pulsing gently, sea green like the other, but perhaps a trifle larger. Do you have separate dreams for boys and girls? Sophie asked. Sometimes, of course, the BFG said. If I have given a girl's dream to a boy, even if it was a really wopsy girl dream, the boy would be waking up and thinking it was a rot bungler scratch dreamer. Yeah, boys would, Sophie said. Here is just girls' dreams on this shelves. Can I read a boy dream? You can, the BFG said, and he lifted her to a higher shelf. The label on the nearest boy dream said, I is making myself a marvelous pair of suction boots, and when I is putting them on, I is able to walk straight up the kitchen wall and across the ceiling. While I is walking upside down on the ceiling, when my big sister comes out and she is yelling at me like she always does, yelling, What on earth is you doing up there walking on the ceiling? And I looks down at her and I says, I told you you was driving me up the wall, and now you has done it. I find that one rather silly, Sophie said. A boy wouldn't, the BFG said, grinning. It's another route bigger. Perhaps you have seen enough now. Oh, let me read one more, Sophie said. The next one said, "The telephone is ringing in our house," and my father picks it up and says it is, in his very important telephone voice, "Simpkins speaking," and then his face goes white and his voice goes all funny, and he says, "What? Who?" Then he says, "Yes, sir, I understand, sir, but surely it is me you is wishing to speak to, and not my little son." My father's face is going from white to dark purple, and he is gulping like he has got a lobster stuck in his throat, and then he is saying, "Yes, sir, very well, I will get him, sir." And he turns to me, and he says in a rather respectful tone, "Is you knowing the President of the United States?" And I is saying, "No, but I expect he is hearing about me." And then I is having a long talk on the telephone and saying things like, "Let me take care of him, Mr. President," and "You'll bungle it up if you do it your way." And then my father's eyes is goggling right out of his head. And that is when I is hearing my father's real voice saying, "Get up, you lazy slob, or you'll be late for school." "Boys are crazy," Sophie said. "Let me read another." I is having a bath, and I is discovering that if I is pressing quite hard on my tummy button, a funny feeling is coming over me, and suddenly my legs is not there, nor is my arms, and I is absolutely invisible all over. I is still there, but nobody can see me, not even myself. And so my mummy comes in and says, "Where is that child? He was in the bath a minute ago, and he cannot have washed himself properly." And I says, "Here he is." And she says, "Where?" And I says, "Here." And she says, "Where?" And I says, "Here." And she yells, "Henry, come up quick." And then my daddy rushes in, and I is washing myself, and my daddy is seeing the soap floating around in the air, but not seeing me, and he shouts, "Where is you, boy?" And I say, "Here." And he says, "Where?" And I say, "Here." And he says, "Where?" And I says, "Here." And he says, "The soap, boy. The soap is flying in the air." And then I press my tummy button again, and now I is visible, but my daddy is squiffy with excitement and says, "You is the invisible boy." And I says, "Now I is going to have some fun." So when I is out of the bath and I is dried myself and I is putting on my dressing gown and slippers, I press my tummy button again and become invisible. And I go to the town and I walk in the streets. And of course, only me is invisible, but not the things I is wearing. And when people is seeing a dressing gown and slippers floating along the streets with nobody in it, there is a panic and everyone is yelling, "Ghost, ghost, it's a ghost." And people is screaming left and right. And a big, strong policeman is running for their lives. And best of all, I see Mr. Grummet, my maths teacher, coming out of the pub, and I float up to him and I say, "Boo!" And he lets out a frightsome howl and dashes back into the pub. Then I is waking up feeling as happy as a quiff squiddler. "That one's ridiculous," Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing on her own tummy button to see if it worked, but nothing happened. "Dreams is very mystical things," the BFG said. "Human beings is not understanding them at all. Not even in their brainiest professors is understanding them. Has you seen enough?" "Just this last one," Sophie said, "please." She started reading. "I has written a book, and it is so exciting that nobody can put it down, and as soon as you had read the first line, you is so hooked on it that you cannot stop until the last page. In all the cities, people is walking in the street, bumping into each other because their faces is buried in my book. And dentists is reading while they is trying to fill the teeths, but nobody is minding because they is reading it in the dentist chair. Drivers is reading it while driving it, and cars is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeons is reading it while they is operating on brains, and airline pilots is reading it going down to Timbuktu instead of London. Football players is reading it on the field because they can't put it down, and so are Olympic runners when they is running. Everyone has to see what is going to happen next in my book, and when I wake up, I is still tingling with excitement at being the greatest writer in the whole world. Until my mummy comes in and says, "I was looking at your English book last night, and your spelling is atrocious, and so is your punctuations." "That's enough for now," the BFG said. "There's dillions more. My arm is getting tired holding you up, Sophie." "What are those over there?" Sophie said. "Why have they got such small labels?" "That," the BFG said, "is because one day I is catching so many that I is not having the time or the energy to write out a long label, so there is just enough to remind me." "Can I look?" Sophie said. The long-suffering BFG carried her across the jars she was pointing to. Sophie read them rapidly, one after the other. "I is counting Mount Everlast with just my pussycat for company." Or, "I is inventing a car that is running on toothpaste." I is able to make the electric lights go on and off just by blinking at them. I is only 8 years old, but I has grown a splendid bushy beard, and all the other boys is jealous. I is able to jump out of any high window and float down to safety. I has a pet bee that makes rock and roll music when it flies. What amazes me, Sophie said, is how you ever learned to read or write in the first place. Ah, the BFG said, I have been wondering how long it was going to be taking you before you was asking me that. I mean, considering that you never went to school, I think it's quite marvelous, Sophie said. How did you learn? The BFG crossed the cave and opened a tiny secret door in the wall. He took out a book very small and tattered. Now, by human standards, it was an ordinary-sized book, but it looked like a postage stamp in his huge hands. One night, he said, I is blowing a dream through a window, and I sees this book lying on the little boy's bedroom table. I wanted it so badly, you understand, but I is refusing to steal it. I would never do that. Well, then how did you get it? Sophie asked. I borrowed it, the BFG said, smiling a little. Just for a short time I is borrowing it. How long have you had it? Sophie asked. Oh, perhaps about 80 years, the BFG said. Soon I shall be putting it back. And that's how you taught yourself to write? Sophie asked him. I is reading it hundreds of times, the BFG said, and I is still reading it and teaching new words to myself and how to write them. It is the most scrum-diddly-umptious story. Sophie took the book out of his hand. Nicholas Nickleby, she read aloud. By Dahl's Chickens, the BFG said. By who? Sophie said. But then out of the... Oh no! My book's turned off. Anyways, I know what happens because I know this story very well. What happens then is that as the BFG goes to explain who Dahl's Chickens is, I think he means Charles Dickens, they can hear all of the giants shouting as they go out for their nighttime hunt to eat human beings, and they say that they're going to England to eat school children.